Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. Lost in a sea of machinery, an aircraft that helped America reach new heights.
It has such a unique, special role in history that no other aircraft can lay claim to.
A sporting arena built in a county that didn't play by the rules.
We didn't have anything, much around here in the early days. You had to do something to survive.
And defenses near the Capitol hide a story that was nearly lost forever.
It was involved in the protection of the United States Capitol. But in a bigger sense, it was here to serve a mission to protect the world.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures. Forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. In the hot, dry lands near the border with Mexico is a sight to behold, and it hides a creation that helped America reach for the stars.
We're on the edge of the city of Tucson, Arizona, and right here is a pretty unbelievable scene.
We're looking into a vast spectacle of decommissioned airplanes on a monumental scale. This is the largest airplane boneyard on the whole planet.
And nearby is a site holding the select few that really made a difference.
This is like a greatest hits of aviation history. I mean, all the weird and most effective vessels kind of all in one place.
Stored out here in the desert are all manner of aircraft that were vital to innovation in the 20th century. They won wars, shattered records, and broke barriers. But out here is stored one of the most unique-looking and interesting aircraft you'll ever see.
It looks like a bloated, monstrous whale, and staring at it, it beggars belief that this thing could ever course through the sky.
But looks can be deceiving.
This airplane is one of the most unsung but important aircraft of the 20th century. It made America's single greatest achievement of the 20th century possible.
The sheer size tells us that this was designed to carry some truly heavy cargo, but the real clue as to what this was for lies in the little bumps to the edge of the fuselage.
So what we're looking at here on the side of the airplane are two features that make it really, really unique. In simple terms, they're just basically hinges. The whole front of the aircraft would swing open just like a regular front entrance door to your house, and that enabled the crews to load the cargoes.
Regular cargo planes are loaded from the rear. This approach was a design headache. However, it helps identify what the plane was for.
So the reason is because of the huge diameter of the components they're putting in. They weren't able to get them into existing cargo airplanes through the traditional rear entry points.
What it carried in that big belly, well, it had a huge impact on America. And what they were trying to achieve with this plane was uncharted territory.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
When President Kennedy addressed Congress in 1961, it was clear the Cold War had boiled over into space.
But the space race was an expression of rivalry between the United States, between capitalism and Soviet societies under communism. And this was fought out in many ways, propaganda, sports, but most strikingly perhaps, who could get into space first, who could put a man on the moon.
America, however, was on the back foot.
The Soviets are worryingly ahead. They've put the first satellite into space. They've put the first man into space.
This was a huge challenge. Frankly, when he said it, the US was still pretty far from being able to achieve anything like that.
It was against this high-stakes backdrop that the Super Guppy was born.
Everyone's heard of the B-52s, the Spitfires, the stealth bombers, all the things that are kind of powerful and feared. And this is like putting like a trailer truck in the sky to haul things, which sounds less exciting. But when you really dig into the story, you realize that this changed history.
And here we are. This is what it's all about. It's as unique inside as it is from the outside. It's enormous. It's a structure unlike any other aircraft you're going to ever come inside of. The airframe fuselage is 25 feet in diameter here, and from flight deck to the tail, it's a 98-foot length of cargo deck that's 8 feet wide. So in comparison to a regular airliner at the time, or even a cargo carrying aircraft, it's probably better than double the volume.
Super Guppy's payload demanded an exceptionally large aircraft.
It wasn't designed to carry just any cargo. Its mission was very specific. The Super Guppy was purpose-built to carry rocket modules for the Apollo program to get us to the moon.
The deadline for reaching the moon was set, the end of the decade. Time was the new enemy.
One of the biggest hurdles was logistics, especially transporting the components from the West Coast manufacturers to the East Coast, where the launch sites were actually to be found. They were far too big to transport by road and rail, and if you went by ship, it would take 18 days.
Jack Conroy, a former Air Force pilot, teamed up with businessman Lee Mansdorf. Their vision was to build a plane large enough to carry some of these components.
He realized that if you could transport them, you could cut that waiting time from about 2 weeks to 24 hours, and that would give America the crucial upper hand.
So of course, anything that's being done in a hurry for the first time, it comes with risks and it comes with challenges. We were modifying things that hadn't been designed to be modified, and it could have ended very badly at any point in the program.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. To be sure, we are behind, and will be behind for some time in manned flight. But we do not intend to stay behind, and in this decade, we shall make up and move ahead.
By the time Kennedy made that speech in 1962, Conroy had been working on his prototype design of an oversized cargo plane for around a year.
After he came up with his plan, Conroy made general inquiries with NASA. Now, he didn't get a contract, but he did get enough of an enthusiastic response that he decided to go ahead with his plan.
Conroy basically gambled it all. I mean, remortgaging his house, taking out multiple loans, and there were no guarantees from NASA that even if this worked, they were going to use it.
Now, Conroy's first version, known as the Pregnant Guppy, was ready to test.
September 19th, 1962, first test flight. Confidence was the opposite of high. They called the police department, fire department, told everyone to stand by.
Like any innovative first, it attracts an audience, and it attracts a certain amount of doomsayers and doubters, and the Guppy's not unique in that respect. There was a lot of white knuckles and crossed fingers and hopes that it would do what it was designed to do.
But to everyone's surprise, it was a success, and before he knew it, he was flying to NASA.
A year later, the Pregnant Guppy flew the second stage of NASA's prototype rocket to Cape Canaveral. as part of the Apollo program. However, to help get a man on the moon before the end of the decade, they would need another plane, and they needed to go bigger.
The Super Guppies had their airframe genesis, and these two airplanes behind us, basically these are derivatives of a civilian B-377 Strato Cruiser, which was an airliner. The airliner was such a successful model that they were converted for military use as a cargo carrier and ultimately a refueling aircraft. And it was really well built, and it was just the right sort of rugged basis for the Guppy's creation.
Designed to transport the third stage of the Saturn V rockets, it needed to be both longer and wider than the original Guppy. Built from 3 B-377s and 1 military variant, the fuselage of the original airliner was extended by 31 feet. At the same time, the 25-foot diameter upper section was built above.
They framed up a construction gantry, a grid, and built the airframe from that waterline up in a great big arc to the crown, and then skinned it and built it forward. And until you get everything locked together, you don't have the rigidity and the strength. It's a delicate balancing act, and it's a real testament to not only the engineers, but the fabricators who pulled this off. This was really a custom bespoke job. It is absolutely not the normal way of building a plane.
Before the Super Guppy could be thrown into service, though, it had to pass a series of tests. Here, an obvious issue that also impacts later versions reared its head.
The most notable feature of the Guppy is its massive size, its huge diameter. Well, that doesn't make it very aerodynamic. You're really pushing a brick through the air, and that's a real challenge.
In flight, it made some terrifying noises. There were real fears that it might just break up mid-flight.
One of the test engineers reported that he'd walked into the fuselage during the test flight, and he said it was like staring into a willow basket in a windstorm.
Nevertheless, with no failures so far, on a clear September morning in 1965, she took to the sky once more. And this time, the fears turned into reality.
Now it's time for the final test flights, and you get the easier ones out of the way first. So this was one of the hardest ones, a dive from 10,000 feet at high speed. Suddenly there was this loud explosion. Someone said it was like a bomb going off, and then the whole plane started to shake violently.
As they passed the 275 miles per hour mark, the pressure on the fuselage became too great, and it suddenly imploded.
Above the cockpit, there was now a 23-foot wide hole.
The plane was now speeding towards the Earth. The crew had no option but to try to regain control.
They are wrestling to keep this thing in the air, and this is them fighting for their lives.
Eventually, the Guppy was steadied, and the crew were able to land it on a dry lake bed. Disaster was averted, but it was close.
The Super Guppy went in for repairs. Reinforcements were added. And soon enough, she repeated the test and passed with flying colors.
So once the Guppy had cleared its flight trials and got its acceptance from the FAA, it went into service immediately in support of the Apollo mission program, moving Saturn rocket components across the country to Cape Canaveral. Before the end of the decade, it had covered almost 1 million miles carrying its important cargo back and forth.
On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched. 4 days later, the astronauts entered lunar orbit.
In addition to flying the major rocket sections for the Saturn rockets, this particular airplane also carried the Eagle moonlander and the Columbia Command Module.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
This was a huge propaganda coup. It communicated to the world that America was more resilient, more powerful, more innovative than its Soviet rivals.
It's really safe to say that without this particular airplane, the United States would not have achieved its objective of putting a man on the moon before the end of the 1960s.
Four upgraded Super Guppies were later built, but the original remained in service until 1991, when it joined the Tucson Boneyard fleet. Some planes are stored here temporarily, others are used for parts. NASA felt this one deserved something special.
NASA was very conscious of the historical significance of the Guppy at this point, and they approached us here hoping that we could preserve it in public display storage versus being in secure storage at a military facility, and we were, very eager to help them out with that.
Soon moved here to the Pima Air and Space Museum alongside other aircraft of historical significance. Ownership was handed over in 2015, and the Super Guppy is now a permanent fixture.
Every one of these airplanes is animated by someone's memory, by someone's connection, by someone's personal involvement with it. And the Guppy is unique amongst them in its role and significance to history.
When you look at it, you really got to stand back and give it some credit, Without it, I don't think we have a moon landing in July 1969. So, thanks, Super Guppy.
In the Tar Heel State is a town where a farming community made their own luck.
Tar Heel is a derogatory term saying that people have dirty manual labor jobs, but it's one that the people of North Carolina have owned for themselves. As the saying goes, if God isn't a Tar Heel, why did he make the sky Carolina blue?
In the county of North Wilkesboro, history pivots on a battered circuit of asphalt.
Clearly, the stands have weathered over the years, but the concrete is still sound. However, there are boxes that are falling over.
The track itself is littered with weeds and grasses that are growing through the asphalt, but it still isn't hard to imagine cars whipping around this 5/8 of a mile track and making your head spin.
To many residents of Wilkes County, however, this track is home.
Just about most of the people has been here involved in the Speedway in one way or the other.
And the downfall of this place would lead some to take drastic measures.
That's all you could do was survive. You just couldn't get ahead without something else.
Dean Combs's family moved to Wilkes County in the 1940s, in the aftermath of the Great Depression.
My mama, she was a green bean raiser. Had an uncle, he grew the pigs. Another one, my mama made buttermilk. She made milk. She had 3 milk cows. I don't think people got governor help back in those days. Just manual work is basically what it was, manual work.
Farming communities like Wilkes County were slow to recover. Some families supplemented their income by making and selling moonshine.
It was those that did it and those that lied about it. Most people did it to feed families, This was a farming community and they're wanting a lot of money to go around, and moonshine was a way of life.
My dad, I really didn't know that much about his operation, but the understanding that I got, he mostly had distilleries built and had other people working for him. That's when they got their extra cash. They get extra cash in. They could go out and sell a little moonshine or whiskey here and there, and they could get a little more money and build up.
And like in so many places across the U.S., where there's moonshine, there's stock car racing. In 1946, they laid ground on a track that would one day become legendary. The North Wilkesboro Speedway.
Just unreal for anybody to see a race. You know, they saw maybe people going up and down the highway roads, the dirt roads, back in those days. Local people that worked together, it kind of created a bond between people.
The first Speedway was a dirt track with 4 banked turns. And back then, stock car racing was something else.
In the early 1940s, stock car racing was a little haphazard. You had different competitions all around the country. You had different tracks. There really was no regulation.
Stock car racing was still something that was done on the weekends by local moonshiners and people who were just enjoying modifying their cars to make them as fast as possible.
But the new Speedway would have a profound impact on the future of the sport. In 1947, its opening event was promoted by a businessman from Washington, D.C., a former racer, a man called Bill France.
Bill France came along and realized the potential of this hobby, and he thought he could make it into a sport. So he held a race at North Wilkesboro Stadium to prove that this could not only be a viable sport, but one that will bring out thousands of people.
The bleachers were standing room only. The race was won by future legend Fonty Flock.
It was a smashing success from the get-go. They expected 3,000 attendees. Instead, they got 10,000.
Following the success of North Wilkesboro's first race, Bill France established the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing.
Most of your NASCAR fans are blue collar. Hard working every day, 8-hour people or farmers or whatever, that's the one that fill the stands.
Any NASCAR event is going to bring a big spectacle. It is the place where people go to connect with their neighbors and their friends and watch something that is important to their culture, their heritage, and their history.
The start of the engines, the old loud cars, you hear the mother hit and the speed and the competition that was there, it was just so exciting.
At 23 years old, Dean Combs made his debut on the starting line.
But then I was just, kind of sitting here just to think about it, just the way you just kind of tense up, butterflies. You'd think you got to go to the bathroom. You think you have to do this. You already buckled in the car ready to go, and it just leaves you. Just leaves you. When they drop that flag, it's over with. Because you and that race car is all should be on your mind.
NASCAR transformed how the North Wilkesboro Speedway operated. Now, tracks across the country all followed the same rules.
Play becomes sport when rules are established to level the playing field for all competitors. NASCAR established rules for stock cars and how far you could modify them, and established the first rule book. But for a lot of race car drivers, rules are just suggestions.
This was scales where they weighed the race car with. In other words, they had a rule that you had to weigh no less than 3,700 pounds. Why? Why is because you can think about weight. Weight is basically horsepower. The lighter you run, the faster the car is going to run versus the same horsepower.
But at the North Wilkesboro Speedway, the tricks of the bootlegger were brought to the racetrack.
Stock car racing has its roots in prohibition and people trying to escape police. If horse racing is the sport of kings, NASCAR is the sport of outlaws.
Lead in their wheels when they go across the scales in a race, they'd have the other wheels on. Everybody worked to try to get lighter.
So your race teams are doing everything they can to modify their cars to bend the rules and sometimes break them just a little bit to be able to give their car and their driver an advantage.
Everybody cheated, but you didn't cheat till you got caught. That was our theory. You don't cheat till you get caught. If you don't cheat, you're not gonna win.
But even a strict rule book can't completely eliminate the risks that go with stock car racing.
In 1957, at the Wilkes 160 race, the axle of one of the cars snapped. A wheel came careening off, bounced over the fence, and crashed into the audience, killing one spectator.
But you can see this wall right here. We got a cement then, it was just boards. It was like 2x8 boards put in the ground with a post. That car just came through and lost the wheel bounced and went up in the stands and went through that fence and landed and killed a person, right down through there.
Fortunately, such incidents are rare, and increasing regulation of the sport has made it safer. The accident at North Wilkesboro was an important prompter of those regulations.
But after the incident at Wilkes 160, the Speedway went from strength to strength.
Probably the proudest wins I have is been right here. When we went here, we partied. I raced here, we'd have cookouts, we'd have whatever, we'd enjoy it. And I don't see anywhere that I won that I enjoyed winning anymore here, be more proud than winning right here.
By the 1980s, the Speedway was hosting events to sell out crowds. Wilkes County had never had it so good.
The economy that it brought in, the people that came in from towns, there was probably 3 or 4 just little old backyard stores where people stop and buy their drinks, buy this and buy that, and really helped the economy for them. And a lot of times they didn't have enough to sell them.
But by the middle of the 1990s, the county's golden age had ended.
You got to bring the spectacle. As NASCAR grew, older tracks like North Wilkesboro just couldn't keep up with the capacity and the facilities of the newer tracks. So unfortunately, by the 1990s, it wasn't used as much, and even local teams were looking for other racetracks to race their cars.
At the end of 1996, NASCAR stopped coming to North Wilkesboro Speedway, taking with it an economy that fueled Wilkes County.
Basically when the Speedway shut down, we had textile here, we had furniture, we had Lowe's Hardware was started here. The big Lowe's Hardware was actually started by Mr. Jim Lowe here, and he would be at the Speedway. And now, they've all moved away. They're not here. They're not here.
The North Wilkesboro Speedway has been silent for over 25 years. But some residents of Wilkes County have returned to an old occupation and even gone legit.
I've always set out to make a mild, strong whiskey that everybody would like and it wouldn't burn you. I've probably not changed the way I do it in the last 40 years. But I started when I was about 9 years old, and I'm be 76 next month. So do the math.
The moonshine culture is kind of having a revival, especially in this part of the country, and people have gone back to making it again. Some people collect stamps, some people make moonshine.
Near the nation's capital is a complex designed to defend America. But a classified operation there had consequences on a global scale.
This is one of the most important places in American history. It's the last turn in the Potomac River before you reach the nation's capital.
You have thick walls, places where there would have been gun emplacements. It's clear that the whole site was built with one purpose in mind: war.
However, this structure is not alone.
There's not one fort here, but 2. Directly across the river is another fort.
The defenses tell a story stretching across 2 centuries. But while designed for battle, their greatest contribution came from something entirely different.
And it's not the exterior defenses that would matter. It's what went on inside that was important. Stationed here was a top secret organization that the public wouldn't even find out about until this century.
Much of the classified story was revealed after an investigation began asking questions about a code name, P.O. Box 1142.
We were able to get a phone number for a gentleman who worked here during World War II. And when we called up, we mentioned the name P.O. Box 1142, it resulted in some silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, his question was, how do you know about P.O. Box 1142?
The U.S. was able to attain vital war information. The work that was done here was hugely important to the Allies' victory.
Straddling the Potomac River, the two forts and additional batteries here were built with one goal in mind. Vincent Santucci has worked with the Park Service for around 2 decades.
We are south of Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. is in the distance. And this fort was constructed specifically as a way to protect the American capital.
Completed in 1824, the oldest remaining structure is Fort Washington. But it's only here because an earlier fort failed to protect the capital a decade before.
With tensions arising in Europe, America feared war, so it began to fortify almost every key seaport with new batteries and new defenses. No seaport was of as big an importance as this one.
The concern would be that the British had a tremendously well-recognized and respected Navy, and the Potomac would afford a route right up to the doorstep of the American capital.
Completed in 1809, the original fort was far smaller than the one standing today, with tall earthen walls and a stone tower to house cannons. But during the War of 1812, the fort failed in its duty.
The view from this point on August 24th, 1814, would be looking to the north and seeing the glow of the fire in Washington, D.C.
Instead of sailing up the river to the capital, the British had chosen to land further to the east.
They marched to the city and they set it on fire. This was a huge blow to Americans strategically, but also to their morale.
Next, the British were heading here.
The fort was undermanned, underarmed. They used the last of their remaining gunpowder to blow up the fort, making it essentially unusable to the British.
The British occupation soon faltered, but it was painfully clear that strong defenses would be vital to safeguard America's future.
It was such an important strategic location, they decided to rebuild on the same site again.
Fort Washington was just the beginning. The upgrades around this area continued over decades.
Not only were the defenses of Fort Washington rebuilt and strengthened, but many years later they decided to build a second fort directly across the river.
The new structures, however, never saw conflict. But in the 20th century, they'd be called upon to defend America in an altogether different way.
The protection that was done here during World War II was not just to protect the capital, but it was a more global outreach to protect the world.
While both forts had been decommissioned by this time, in 1942, they were brought back into the fold. Fort Washington housed the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. Fort Hunt was requisitioned for a clandestine operation.
The guns had long been removed, but it became important for something else. The top secret organization known only by its mailing address, P.O. Box 1142.
In the early 2000s, the National Park Service began to research the use of this site during the Second World War.
There actually were quite a few buildings throughout Fort Hunt Park that were part of the U.S. Army's installation here. But most of that is gone, torn down directly after the war.
Few structures remained. There was little surviving documentation. The team needed to find a new source of information.
It wasn't until we had one of our park rangers out providing an interpretive walk and talk for visitors, and somebody in the audience raised their hand and said, "Hey, I know somebody that used to work here. Would you like to talk with him?"
What followed was a 5-year project involving extensive interviews with around 75 veterans that worked here.
We began to uncover a much broader story of activities that were going on here. But the primary program has to do with the military intelligence interrogation program. Largely, it was trying to obtain information and intelligence from German prisoners.
Listening to the former workers and analyzing the few surviving photos, Vincent Santucci has formed an idea of what it might have looked like back then.
One of the most interesting aspects of Fort Hunt, which is no longer here any longer, are 2 prisoner compounds. So the center of the compound would be the prisoner cells, and it would be surrounded by a gated area where they could get out and exercise outdoors. These 2 large prisoner compounds would be completely fenced. There would be guard towers.
There were more than 500 prisoner of war camps across the U.S. But this site, on the edge of the Potomac, was something different.
Being close to Washington, D.C. and the Pentagon was very handy. The prisoners that were interrogated at P.O. Box 1142 were high-ranking officers, so that they had the propensity of having more important intelligence that could help the United States effort.
Intelligence gathering from the various types of camps proved vital to the Allied war effort. Listening devices were installed. Undercover agents were planted. And here, it's possible that a key German site was first identified.
The most important service that we performed, at least I did, and 2 or 3 others, by listening to 2 naval officers, we discovered Peenemünde.
Headed by Werner von Braun, Peenemünde was a key part of the Nazis' missile and rocket program that ultimately wrought devastation on London and beyond.
They kept talking about it, especially this one pair, and the officer said, "Don't worry about it. We're going to win this war because," etc., 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 talking about Peenemünde again. And then I think this guy mentioned rockets. It's going to turn the war around completely.
To extract all they could from the eavesdropping and interrogations, the military had recruited some unlikely candidates.
Many were German-born Jews. They lived and grew up in Germany. They were impacted by the Holocaust. They fled Europe, came to the United States and said, "Give me a gun, I want to go back and fight the Nazis."
Where they ended up, however, was a long way from the front line.
Told him to sit down. I sat down. I said to him, "Your name, please?" He said to me, "Why are you asking me this? We went to school together." Isn't that amazing? He remembered me. He gave me all kinds of information.
The interviews suggest a wealth of valuable intel was discovered here. There are no reports of violence or torture being used, but occasionally, the prisoners did require some persuasion. Here, the older structures had a unique role to play.
With the most resistant German prisoner, when they finally realized that they weren't going to get any information from them, they would blindfold them, handcuff them, they would take them and they would put them in the back of a truck.
After hours of driving around, it was hoped they'd believe they had been transferred far away.
So the vehicle with the prisoner on would drive down to one of these doors, and they would back it in and then bring the prisoner in and take them into a room where they take the blindfold off and the handcuffs, and at that point, out of the darkness walks somebody with a Russian uniform. Even the most resistant pro-Nazi prisoners usually cooperated better after thinking that they were going to go with the Russian.
Following Allied victory in Europe as part of Operation Paperclip, a number of leading Nazi scientists and engineers were brought to the U.S., including Werner von Braun. Reports suggest he was held here, and by now, the approach to internment had evolved somewhat.
There was one position, it's called a morale officer, and the morale officer is the person who actually provides rewards to them. And so there's some great stories about taking people that cooperated into DC and buying items to send back to their family.
I couldn't think that my interaction with Werner von Braun, I couldn't make it up. We start first buying food, the way I remember it. And then I said, what next? And they said to me that they would want to buy some underwear for their wives. I had 4 guys with me, 2 of them with leather coats, and 1 or 2 with terrorist hats. That was an unreal scene.
Werner von Braun went on to play a vital role in NASA's space program. Alongside him, hundreds of other scientists and engineers had come through here. In total, almost 3,500 prisoners were questioned at P.O. Box 1142. But by the end of 1946, the camp had completed its work. The structures were bulldozed, and documents mentioning its name were burned. Sworn to secrecy, the sacrifices of those who served at P.O. Box 1142 came close to being lost forever.
You know, we had dozens and dozens of new grandfathers that allowed us to come into their living room, and that they entrusted us to come in with cameras and audio recordings, and for them to tell a story that they'd never told became very personal. There were lots of tears shed by everybody, including park rangers, when these men were able to finally share their stories with their families and others.
Given my background, it wasn't that easy to be in the presence of a German officer, and quite frankly, it was unpleasant, to put it mildly. I mean, I'd almost feel like vomiting for the very simple reason I had to be nice to these guys.
But having gone unrecognized for decades, the work of all those stationed here was finally commemorated in 2007.
We dedicated this memorial to the veterans of P.O. Box 1142, and part of that ceremony was to raise the first flagpole that's been raised since the Second World War. These men said that the way that they felt honored and recognized made up for the 65 years of being forgotten.